Hello friends, there are four main types of animal tissue we're going to study: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscular tissue, and nervous tissue. We start with epithelial tissue, the tissue which covers the surfaces of the organism. While they can be external environment, part of body which have contact with external environment, or the body cavities, internal surfaces, they all covered by epithelial tissue. In some part of body, epithelial tissue can form glands to be involved in function of secretion. That's what there are some these features which make epithelial tissue different from other tissues. The first one, epithelial tissue is manifested, arranged in continuous sheets like all skin of human body, from tip of the tooth to the top of the head, all covered with epithelial tissue. All of the cells one by one connected, linked one another to make a continuous sheath in one layer of cell, one row or more than one. All epithelial cells rest on a basement membrane, which are non-cellular membrane. Epithelial cells very packed with one another with very little intercellular space. Just they have almost no intercellular substance because of their function of protection. The cells ending are attached to one another by, in some locations, by cell junctions, and classified into two basic types according to number of layers. If we end above only one layer, simple epithelial tissue, but more than one layer, we call them stratified epithelial tissue. Simple epithelial tissue composed of one line of epithelial cells which rest on a basement membrane, and classified into four different types according to shape of cell. The first one, simple squamous epithelial tissue, composed of one layer. Single layer means it's simple, flattened cells. Squamous or squamine means about something like scale of fish. From overview, they have a polygonal appearance with a central flat nucleus, because shape of nucleus also adapted to the shape of cells, or flattened cells with flat nucleus in center. The epithelial tissue covers the inner lining of blood vessels, body cavities, lung vesicles, and Malpighi particles. That locations. Malpighi particles, they are parts of kidney. The functions of simple squamous epithelial tissue serve the function of diffusion. Lung vesicles, part of body where oxygen carbon dioxide exchange happen by diffusion, so they're related to one another in inner lining of blood vessels, especially microscopic blood vessels. Blood capillaries provide material exchange between tissues and blood, also with diffusion. And these Malpighi particles, parts of kidney. We know the main function of kidney is also filtration, so if we know the locations, which part of body, we can assume the function of these tissues. About drawing of the tissue, we need to draw a basement membrane for all kinds of epithelial tissue. A thicker part for connective tissue which connect the epithelial tissue to the other body parts. The basement membrane or basal lamina. On that page we draw one layer of cells, but which kind of cells? Flat cells. With what? With central and flat nucleus. So we show their nucleus and flat cells. Simple cuboidal epithelial tissue composed of one single layer of cubic cells, quadrangular appearance overview, and they have a large spherical central nucleus. The tissue is found in inner lining of kidney tubus. Kidney tubus, part of kidney with reabsorption is occur, which related to the function of absorption, and salivary glands, part which provide what, when we see glands, we know they involved in function of secretion. How to draw this tissue? Again, we draw our basement membrane, part of connective tissue, and one layer of cubic cells. And not to forget to central spherical nucleus, large central spherical nucleus, cubic cells, basement membrane, and connective tissue. Simple columnar epithelial tissue. Type of epithelial tissue line up in long columns. They tend to take the rectangular appearance in their section. The nuclei of the cells are ovoid, like an egg, take a very close to the location of basement mean basal nucleus. This tissue lines the inner lining of the intestine. We know in intestine, in large intestine, reabsorption of water occur, or in small intestine, secrete digestive enzymes to digest food, also protect from microorganisms. And some other glands also, when we say the gland, we need to know the function of secretion. How to draw it? Again, one thick layer of epithelial tissue, a thin basement membrane, rectangular appearance, cell, and ovoid nucleus closer to the base of cell. Above that cilia on the surface, we may remember the inner lining of small intestine contain tiny cytoplasmic injection or finger-like projection known as villi. So we call it ciliated simple columnar epithelial tissue, which increases in the surface area for absorption. Pseudostratified columnar epithelial tissue comprise more than one type of cell, not more than one layer, but more than one type of cell according to their shape. So in different shape of cell, the nucleus position also is in different levels, thus the tissue look like made up of several layers. So we call it pseudo-stratified. In real, made up of one layer, but look like more than one. The connective tissue, basement membrane, and the cells. The cells, the free surfaces of the cells may be provided with cilia, but all cells, they rest on basement membrane, but not all the cells reach the outer surface of the tissue, because cells are in different shape of cells, different position of nucleus. We draw the nucleus in columnar cells, ovoid nucleus, flat cells, central nucleus, ovoid nucleus. So, because under the microscope the plasma membrane is unseen, what we see the nucleus, so we count the number of layers according to layer of nucleus. So when we look at this under the microscope, it looks like there are more than one layer of cell, so it has this name of pseudostratified columnar epithelial tissue. It may be provided with cilia. In that time we call it ciliated pseudostratified epithelial tissue, like in endothelia of trachea, the air tube. Also, in that glands has the function of secretion. in trachea, function of protection to trap the solid particles which found in air and clean the air. So simple squamous epithelial tissue, we said mainly question about this kind of tissue is asked about their location and function. For location and function, if we study on that table, memorize it, it will be enough to answer the questions, ministry exam questions. Simple squamous epithelial tissue is made up of one layer of flattened cells, rest on basement membrane with central flat nucleus, and located in the lung vesicles, like in function of diffusion, in blood vessels in function of diffusion, body cavities function of diffusion, but in multipulpy particles which are part of kidney function of filtration. Simple cuboidal epithelial tissue in, again, kidney tubules, part of kidney which reabsorption occur, and endothelium of glands for function of secretion. Simple columnar epithelial tissue in intestine to provide function of protection, absorption, especially in some glands also function of secretion. Pseudostratified columnar epithelial tissue in endothelium of trachea provide the function of protection, and in ducts, in glands, salivary glands provide the function of secretion. The second is stratified epithelial tissue. The stratified epithelial tissue comprises more than one layer of cells. It's found in areas part of body where friction occurs, thus the protecting and preserving the internal organs which covers it. This protection or function of protection is one general function for all kind of stratified epithelial tissue, but also we classify this tissue according to shape of cell which found on the outermost layer of tissue. Stratified squamous epithelial tissue. Squamous composed of more than one layer of cells. The base layers are vertical or cuboidal, rest on a basement membrane. In middle layers they are polyhedral, can be in different shapes, but the surface layer are flatness and squamous. So name of tissue depend on what? Depend on outermost layer of cells. Its outermost layers of cells are flat or squamous shape because squamous epithelial tissue. So this outermost layer of cells may be filled with keratin, so we call them keratinized cells, as in the outer layer of skin. It forms the inner lining of mouth when we chew the food because friction occurs, the outer layers are removed, but inner layer can produce new cells. Esophagus, in same way, the transportation of food would expose it to the friction, and it serves the function of protection for that part of body. In drawing, it's important to draw the connective tissue again, the basement membrane. What important we do about the outermost layer must cover it with flat cells. The inner layers, the first one can be columnar or cuboidal, mostly cuboidal cells. The middle layers polygonal with 3 or 4 sides, but outermost layer is important to draw according to name of tissue. Stratified cuboidal epithelial tissue. The cells of the surface layer of this tissue cuboidal in appearance. The cells of middle and base layer are similar to in stratified squamous epithelial tissue. This tissue covers the internal surface of sweat and also salivary glands. When we see glands, we remember the function of secretion, and seminiferous tubules, part of male reproductive system which transport the semen. Also in the part of body friction occurs, it provides the function of protection. About the draw connective tissue, basement membrane, cuboidal cells, and one more cuboidal cells. That one we to draw when asked about to draw stratified cuboidal epithelial tissue, just draw two layers of cubic cells one on another with large central spherical nucleus, and one common function about cuboidal cell is secretion. So in simple or stratified epithelial tissue, we see the shaped cuboidal cells function is secretion. But in stratified epithelial tissue, one common function also protection. Stratified columnar epithelial tissue, the surfaces of this tissue are vertical epithelial cells, where the base and middle tend to be polyhedral and usually smaller like other tissues. But in drawing, we draw two layers like vertical cell one on another with ovoid nucleus closer to the base of cells, which rest on a basement membrane and had connective tissue to stick the other parts of body. This tissue found in the inner lining of male urethra, the part of urogenital system in male. The major function of this tissue also protection. Transitional epithelial tissue. This tissue is a special stratified epithelial tissue because of the outer layer of cells are domed. The top is domed, not flat. One or two nuclei can be found in one side. The middle layers are polyhedral, like base layer can be cuboidal, like in other stratified epithelial tissues, and so they rest on a basement membrane like all others. The cells of the transitional epithelial tissue have the ability to change their shape. Yes, the specialty of this tissue is about this tissue have the ability to change their shapes, thus making the tissue extremely appropriate to the line in the inner walls of the organs, which can change their shape with contraction and expansion. This tissue is found in the inner lining of urinary bladder, ureter, and pelvic of kidney. Simply, if we draw a kidney, the pelvic of kidney, the ureters, and the bladder. So, when the pelvic or ureter or the bladder is empty, the tissue is in that shape. Like what? Look like made up of many layers of cells, but with what? They are more columnar, their flatness. But the same tissue, as material are filtered and accumulated in pelvic or transported in ureters or come together in bladder, this sides of organs swell. As they swell, they become longer and thinner. So we compare this tissue, the same tissue change into that shape. Similar cells, they expand. How they are narrow, but in that how they become wider. So how the thickness decreases, but the length of the tissue increases to the two sides. With what? With contraction and expansion. And it's all about the specialty of this tissue, which having ability to change their shape without any damage. So changing their shape without any damage protect the organs like pelvic or ureters or bladder from any damage with changing their shape. For stratified epithelial tissue also we have a table for location and functions. Like stratified squamous epithelial tissue in lining of mouth and esophagus has the function of protection. Also in skin epidermis, the outermost layer keratinized the cell provide the function of protection. Stratified cuboidal, when we say cuboidal, we remember the function of secretion in simple or stratified. In glands of salivary or sweat glands provide function of secretion, and seminiferous tubules, which are part of male reproductive system, provide the function of protection. Stratified columnar epithelial tissue in lining of urethra part of male urogenital system, transport urine out of body, so protect the inner layer of tissues from this acidious substances. Transitional epithelial tissue located in bladder, ureter, and pelvic kidney. We said this tissue has specialty about cells can change their shape without any damage. So like cubic shaped cells tend to be flattened and change their shape without any damage and provide the function of protection in organs with contraction and